Thank you, Ian. And it's a pleasure to be here today. Yes, my name's Liam O'Keefe. I'm the Market Development Manager at Tyre Stewardship Australia, and I'd just like to thank the presenters who've come before me, Janelle and Blaine and Kevin, and also Catherine, with an interesting contribution as well, I think, to the Tyre debate at the moment, particularly given where we're at with the review of the Act and the like. Just quickly, I'd like to talk about what I'll be covering today. So I'll talk briefly about the Tyre numbers, what in Australia, TSA, National Market Development Strategy that we have, and the Pyrolysis Guide, which I'll be talking about today, which is kind of aimed at a local government audience and decision makers who interact with the pyrolysis and gasification industry. I'm not a technical person myself in terms of a pyrolysis proponent, but I deal with a lot of pyrolysis proponents every week, it seems, and I speak to multiple agencies, and I know other organisations do, so it was felt that it would be good to have an impartial assessment of the technology to provide a decision-making tool. So that's what I'm here to talk about today. Just quickly, in terms of the numbers with tyres, there's about 56 million generated in Australia, only 10% are recycled, around 30% are exported as generally fuel to Asia, and 60% are currently disposed to landfill or a lost resource. So there's a requirement to do a lot more in terms of finding those end markets. As part of that, Tyre Stewardship Australia has been set up. We're funded by a 25-cent levy, which comes from voluntarily from those brands you'll see at the top of the page there, who are the tyre importers, and they pay us to fund us around $3 to $4 million a year, maybe $5 million, to implement the voluntary scheme under the National Product Stewardship Act, and Tyre Stewardship Australia is a not-for-profit company set up to implement the scheme by that 25-cent charge of equivalent passenger units coming into Australia, and participation for councils and the like in the scheme is free because of that 25-cent levy paid voluntarily by the brands. We do a number of activities such as accreditation and compliance, education and awareness, and I'm the Market Development Manager, and administration and reporting. So as part of the market development program, it's about coming up with demand for tyre-derived product. Just very quickly, I'll say what Tyre Stewardship Australia doesn't do. And we don't charge an eco fee, which was something that, was it Janelle talked about earlier, to manage tyres, and we don't contract out the management of tyres. We run the voluntary accreditation and market development scheme, which is different to a lot of product stewardship schemes. So I just emphasise that to understand, what our instruments are and the manner in which we operate. Because we don't manage the tyres directly, we need a very collaborative approach with how we go about that management of tyres, and we've working closely with state government agencies all across Australia, and we've just developed a national market development strategy for waste tyres, which was funded by TSA, Sustainability Victoria, New South Wales Government, Queensland and Western Australia. And as part of that, there's, given it's a strategy with a number of government agencies, there's a lot of vision and statements and the like, but it also comes down to some hard data, and you get the best numbers available at the moment. Just having published this report lately, look at the end-of-life tyre arisings on a state-by-state basis. So if you're interested in those type of numbers, I'd highly recommend having a look at the strategy. One of the other things it does is identify potential new and expanded markets and where we need to look collaboratively and how we can work together as collaborative agencies to deliver upon the potential that we have in various markets. And one of those markets you'll see there is pyrolysis, and it's quite interesting that it doesn't have anything in the immediate term in terms of the consumption. But what we're looking at is the kind of medium to longer term at stimulating that market. But it's good to be able to identify what the potential is, but there's also a lot of risks in the pyrolysis market as well, and this is only from Monday. This was published from the Victorian EPA, a fine going to a pyrolysis proponent who was going to set up and had been taking tyres and hadn't been able to overcome their issues and process their tyres to a great extent. So I get a lot of these calls, councils get calls and the like, regarding the setup of these types of businesses. So what we found is that there is potential benefit in supporting such initiatives, but there's also risks. So there's a part of that. What has been requested from TSA and other agencies is looking to get independent information that, that provides unbiased analysis of pyrolysis and gasification units. And then what we've done with that is then developed a practice guide for regulators, policymakers and alike, just to provide that information to assist in decision-making processes. I was hoping to launch this today, as I know you were also, but we're very well developed with this. So this report is going through some further drafting, but I've got some copies here if there's any very interested parties from any particular agencies. I'd recommend coming up and talking to me, and I've got my card here. You're most welcome to have a look through and see if it you know, provides the benefits that you're looking for. So, as I said, this guide was co-funded by TSA, Sustainability Victoria and Queensland Environment and Heritage Protection. And what it does is it provides an overview of the sector, what is pyrolysis and gasification, some of the market conditions that need to be taken into consideration when you are looking at these proposals, some other considerations like the environmental and regulatory perspectives, and just examples of plants in Australia and also in Europe and alike. And then just some general concluding remarks. For those of you that aren't familiar with pyrolysis and gasification, it refers to two very similar thermal processes that decompose and separate the organic compounds from tyre-derived products, being shredded and chipped tyres, just tyres that have been broken down. You can pyrolyse whole tyres, but it's quite inefficient because of the large mass and the lack of the surface area. And in essence, they produce products such as char, oil, synthetic gas and steel. And pyrolysis refers to the heating in the absence of reactive gases such as oxygen, and gasification does so with oxygen. This table here, which is taken from the report, summarises the pyrolysis and gasification, and I think the key thing to note here is that they are very similar in nature. In essence, they require a pre-treatment, so the breaking down of the tyres into a small enough particle size that create an efficient processing. They have a feed-in aspect to it. Then they have the reactor. And there's the aspect of whether they contain or not contain oxygen, the various temperatures, the gasifications at a higher temperature, and then the emphasis on the end products. Going through we have here the end products, and what you'll see is there's a char, or what can be called a carbon black if it's highly refined, but if it's an unrefined product, it can be often called carbon char, which can be very valuable if it's refined to a great extent. The issue is with a lot of pyrolysis and gasification is that what you put in is what you get out. So quite often you can have impurities that are part of the, sulphurs and alike, which are part of the tyre manufacturing process, which kind of can infiltrate that final product, which means the product cannot be as high a grade to meet the specifications of those highly refined products that consume the carbon char, which is some of the things you need to take into consideration when somebody's coming to talk to you about a proposal. What's your end market? Who are you going to sell it to? Is it being used locally? How refined is the product? Who's going to buy it? And I think a lot of these questions get missed in the big pitch, the big sales pitch, but the reality is the viability of these initiatives comes down to asking those types of questions. Obviously steel is one of the outputs that can be sold. Oil, again, it can be very low grade, type bunker fuel type, and it needs a further refined, great cost to do that. And also synthetic gas, which is generally used on site to kind of offset the larger energy requirement, which is predicated on these systems. So as part of this, sometimes there's a lot of proponents can talk about all these different technologies, and it's not pyrolysis, it's thermal deconstruction, and there's a lot of different names. But in essence, what we're talking about is a type of process that is generally kind of similar in nature, similar concerns in terms of environment and the products and the input. And probably one of the other big issues is with this type of technology is the material size that's used as an input, and the cost for the feedstock is probably one of the other key questions. A lot of pyrolysis proponents say, yeah, I'm going to get $2 a tyre and I'm going to process them, but that doesn't work like that if you've got whole tyres. To actually process those whole tyres into a format that is efficient, around 2 inch, you know, you can be buying that feedstock, and that makes a massive difference from a positive $2.50 to, you know, a negative value associated with that input material. You're losing money. So these are the key questions that need to be asked. I don't know what that is up the top there. So in essence, I'll just say that to summarise, this guide that we're looking to release is to inform government and industry on pyrolysis. It's general information, and it's not there to say yes or no as to whether this technology works. It's a decision-making tool, and it assists in those people that engage with these types of industries to ask the right questions, to know where to go, and to get a general overview of the technology. It's going to be released in June or July, and there's drafts of that available today. How am I going for time? 5 minutes? Okay, look, just before, one of the questions I get asked a lot is, what's TSA's stance on pyrolysis? Are we supportive of pyrolysis? And I'd say we're technology agnostic. We support any technology that is going to process tyres within the standards and environmental regulations and creates a positive product that is able to be sold on the market. But we don't fund processing infrastructure. And if I had to go out to tender, I would get 50 pyrolysis proponents saying, fund me. And how do you differentiate them from each other? So what I do say is, once you're making a product, come to me and we'll assess it and help you develop that market. And haven't had any pyrolysis proponent at that point come to us and say we need funding, not successfully as yet, to say and we have a product and we need to assess its performance to meet the expectations of the end user. And that's where we would like to play. When other organisations come to us and say, what do you think about pyrolysis? Well, I'd say the question is, why are you interested in pyrolysis? Are you interested in it as an investment in an emerging technology that you think could have benefit in the long term? If so, consider it and look at it closely. But are you looking at it as a way of processing stockpiled tyres outside of your municipality? If that's what you're looking at it for, then I'd say think again and think very seriously about it. Probably one of the key reasons is the process works technically. You can make a product, but there's a lot of challenges around the input materials, the technology and the output, and claims quite often the small stockpile and this one outside of Mildura. I get a lot of council saying, you know, why would I process those tyres at an expense with a mechanical standard processor when I can get this pyrolysis guy in and they're going to make me millions of dollars and employ people and we're going to be rich. And so, well, you know, the fact is, the people who have the stockpiles that have accumulated have generally had people take that money and walk away with it and left the tyres. If you have a business model that deals with end-of-life tyres, it needs to be on active tyres where there's a financial value associated with their movement through the supply chain. If you're setting up a business model that looks at stockpile tyres, nobody wants to pay for the processing of stockpile tyres. So the business model, again, the finances in it are altered. And so that's what I mean about looking at those inputs in terms of, you know, where do the tyres come from, who's going to pay to process them, what's the material size, and the actual process itself, and look at the end market. So we're supportive of the industry, we want to see it develop, but we want to see outcomes, we want to see tyres processed. And once we see that, I think others will jump on board and be supportive of the industry. Thank you. Treat tyres, yes. So technically there are people who are processing tyres and making a product. That's the question, isn't it? That's ultimately what I'm saying is you can process tyres and you can make a product, but can you do it in a viable way to create a valuable product that is sustainable as a business model? That's the ultimate question. It is technically possible to do it. You can do it in labs all over the world, but the key question is, what are you making it, who's going to buy it, and how much is it worth? It is. Once they're making something and they've got an end user, I think that's our role, is to develop that. And it is whether it's a pyrolysis proponent or whether it is somebody who's shredding granule or they want to sell it into roads. It's the same role. That's what I mean. We don't penalise pyrolysis proponents. What we're saying is make the product. Give us an indication of who your end user is and what they want to produce. And we'll work work with you to test it and understand what the quality of it is and whether it can be utilised for that particular purpose. And I think that's what our role is in this instance, is to assist in the development of those end markets. But we don't pick or choose which technology is going to be the winner. Whether it's pyrolysis and gasification, and then whether it's which of the 50 proponents we've talked to over the last 3 years we should be funding. And that's the point. It is technically feasible to make it, but is it financially viable? I had the chance of travelling around the world last year as a Churchill Fellowship and visited Canada, the US and Europe, and every territory I asked them, are there financially viable pyrolysis proponents taking your tyres? And they weren't taking them scheme. They are making it, but a lot of those proponents, potentially, is one company called Black Bear Carbon, who are focusing on high quality carbon, $2,000 to $5,000 per tonne as an input into adhesives and tyre making. But they're really tweaking it. It's 5 to 10 years of R&D. So if somebody turns up to your council, knocks on the door and says, we'll start making a product and selling it, say, you've got a lot of work to do. So just to finish, if there's no more questions, I have this guide here. It's in draft format. I encourage anybody who is interested to have a look and provide us some feedback, and appreciate your time today. Thank you.